Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Building an Internal Compass to Navigate Uncertainty, Exploring the Dynamic Leadership Index. I'd like to start by thanking today's sponsor, Sounding Board. Sounding Board empowers forward-thinking companies to bridge leadership gaps at all levels. I'm Jess Thompson, Content Manager for Learning and Development at ATD, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenters. Lori Maison is the co-founder, president, and chief coaching officer at Sounding Board. Lori has spent more than 25 years as a certified coach, developing C-suite executives and critical leadership capabilities to drive business impact. Iyad Yacoub leads behavioral science at Sounding Board as a senior director of behavioral science. His mission is to connect science to practice and tell evidence-based stories to fuel the company's growth. He led L&D and people programs for 3 multi-billion-dollar tech startups and designed nationally recognized coaching and data insights interventions at Stanford, Purdue, and the UN. We have a very exciting presentation lined up for you today. Please chat your great questions and comments to everyone. And now, without further ado, Lori and Iyad.
Great, welcome everyone. We're excited to be here today to talk about our new Leadership Success Index, our Dynamic Leadership Index. And one thing that's exciting, this is the first time that we have brought this information to the public. And we're starting to roll out a new way here to both develop and measure leadership and the components that go into exceptional leadership. We're both colleagues, I'll say, at Sounding Board. And as Jeff stated in the intro, I've been an executive coach for more than 25 years. During the 20 years of that time, I actually probably provided around 2,000 coaching sessions to basically C-suite leaders. And the premise of Sounding Board is really to bring that kind of personalized, intensive development to all leaders in organizations. So we do that with this beautiful team here, who in 5 years has helped 50,000 coaching sessions happen and is fueling our research and development in trying to develop new ways of both developing and measuring leaders, given our very different workplace than we've had in the past. Just to give you a hint of some of the companies that have been using the Sounding Board, here's a little bit of a short list. And then Iyad's gonna get us started by talking about the agenda for today.
Thank you, Lori. This is Iyad. I'm here in beautiful, sunny Walnut Creek, California. So happy to be here, and thank you for tuning in. Today, we have a really exciting kind of experience to share with you. We've been working on this for quite some time, trying to solve for something that hasn't been solved yet. And we think that we have a pretty good idea how we can solve for leadership, but from a different perspective, in a different way, using our concept of dynamic leadership. And we're going to share with you what kind of the thought process, but also the visual that basically represents our ideas and how we think about the future of leadership. So we have 3 goals to achieve today. We're going to talk about capacity and how we can leverage capacity to meet the increasingly complex and rapid demands of the work world today. So we think of how we're connecting capacity in this context of the world of work. We're going to visualize the Dynamic Leadership Index. I think this is the first time that Lori and I, I'm positive, this is the first time we present together and co-present that. So we're going to see how this is going to be evolving over time. And we're going to talk specifically about the 4 key capacities, but today's conversation is about what we call the center of the capacities, the capacity of all capacities. And this is where kind of we're going to focus our attention of today's conversation. And last, we're going to talk about strategies and leadership development to take this concept and apply it in real scenarios and programs for learning and development leaders, people leaders, and leaders in general. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into it, right? So VUCA, for the people who haven't heard of VUCA, VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And we have the word plus because right now VUCA is taking different shapes and forms. It's VUCA on steroids, basically. We live in a situation right now. And a lot of people say that this is unprecedented as a kind of a universal situation, economy, politics, work, and everything, social life, to a point where we need a new solution. We need a new way to think about how we can handle the VUCA we live in right now, uncertainty and ambiguity, and it's a new situation, and we need new processes and how we can adapt to these situations. That's why adaptive mindset, adaptive behaviors, adaptive emotions, and adaptive even motivation are the solutions to tackle the VUCA plus demands in this world. So think about VUCA as the tension that's created in this world. And with VUCA, you need this kind of a new way to solve for leadership. Okay.
Right. And yeah, and one of the ways we are thinking about this is how much the enterprise or corporate environment has changed over the last period of time. To very much date myself, I've been in the workforce for a lot of years. And in the last century, really, the environment was very, very different. So this slide kind of shows a little bit of the changes between, then and now. So when I started my career, there was like a 20-year trajectory for leader development. Like you started like right out of your schooling and you stayed at a company until your retirement, and there was a process that worked you through the system. Now, people only stay at a job 3 to 5 years. So the process for developing leaders has just tightened up dramatically. So how are companies responding to that change in the length of time available for leader development? Back in the 80s and 90s, the workforce was very homogenous. And by that, I mean white male dominated. So the first 10 years of my coaching profession, my coaching career, I only coached male leaders, white male leaders. Why was that? Not because I wanted that, but because that was the only people in the C-suite. So unfortunately, we're maybe not quite as diverse now as I wish we would be, but we have changed a bit on that. And certainly the workforce population is dramatically more diverse than it was in the last century. We also have many more generations operating in the workplace today than we did in the past, which creates a lot of interesting complexity for folks to deal with. And of course, you can't leave out all the technological advancements as well. It's very funny because people often ask me, like, how did you do business without email? How did you function without a cell phone? And for half of my career, we didn't have email, and probably 2/3 we didn't have phones. And of course, we did operate businesses, but those operations of businesses now is very different than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. The unfortunate thing is that we are still developing leaders in the same kinds of ideas and models that were designed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And they were designed for a different environment than we have now. So what Iyad and I want to talk about is a new model for leader development that fits better with our current environment and is not dependent on the way we used to do things in the last century. So how about in the chat? Why don't you list some other things that you think have changed over the last period of time in the workplace. Some of these things, obviously, but there's also a lot more. So let us know what changes you're seeing as well. Up, you're muted. Yeah.
Yep. So what is what a model, Lori? Basically, you kind of talk about kind of when it comes to potential and performance, that you don't think that it's a good idea to keep working on this model or use it for performance or evaluating how we talk about performance.
Well, performance management models all were basically developed in the last century. What was really interesting is that in the 2000s and 2010s, a lot of companies started giving up that old style performance management. But then there was a bit of a problem. There wasn't anything new. So strangely, around 2015, they started going back to those old structures again. I personally don't think that's so useful. So that's why we're wanting to develop new ways to approach a performance and development in organizations. And I see a lot of great changes here in the chat. Interestingly, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal today about how people no longer want to use the word feedback, and they don't want to use old style performance management, that it's was anxiety provoking and not that useful. So some of these ideas around capacity building might be really interesting. And we have additional ideas maybe for another webinar around alignment conversations instead of performance conversations. Yeah, a lot of great items around the changes in the environment in the chat.
Absolutely. One question here that people talk about, why we use VUCA as the source of tension that we built our model on, and why didn't we use BANI? For those who are not familiar with BANI, BANI stands for, it's a relatively newer model, stands for brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. And basically what this basically is about, kind of how we think about the change in the world from a different perspective outside the VUCA perspective. And if you think about VUCA, the tension in VUCA is change is, you know, happening. We need to be more adaptable. So that's kind of the response, and flexible. BANI is more about non-linear, same concept, is a way to think about the kind of change as well, that it's non-linear. Think about the anxiety that comes from as a response to that, the emotional response, and think about kind of is incomprehensible, which is, if you think about it as jingle jangle problem, which is a kind of a reframe of that something is ambiguous, and is it brittle, like right, it's happening right now in a way that is like it's hard for them to stay consistent in their actions. So BANI's response usually is innovation and advancement. VUCA's response is adaptability and through capacity. Either way, whether you're using BANI or VUCA, what we're building here is a universal model to respond to change. Whether it's what I really like this quote, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Some models are just repeating themselves to kind of create more different labels. So
yeah.
But
and I'll add something in there as well. We're using the VUCA model because our model is really around leaders and leadership. And I think the BANI model really is about the workforce as a whole. So I think just for our context, the VUCA approach is a little bit better fit, but it's obviously not exclusive.
Absolutely. Okay, so speaking of change and how kind of how we need to respond, we understand the tension, we understand the change. 20% of businesses and HR leaders, they think and believe that their leaders need to develop capabilities to manage this disrupted, boundaryless world. This is a new survey by Deloitte, Human Capital Trends survey, what they call it, and it's It's just very intuitive that yes, we need different capabilities and different, leadership styles and leadership trends kind of to manage and respond to what we have in terms of change. And this is how we think about the differences between skills, capabilities, and capacity. At Sounding Board, what we think they're different. Now, you can find in other resources and other places, some people use capacity and capabilities interchangeably. Some people use competencies, some people use skills. So what we need to kind of distinguish here, the difference between the three, because they are different from our perspective. Beyond the semantics, we think about them as more like a stock model, hierarchical model, where the more you go up, the more adaptability you need, and the more more emotional, cognitive, behavioral resources you would consume. And the more you go down, it's more about the stable environment and less about change. But the more you go up, the more complexity and ambiguity. So our model is responding to the change by moving from skills to capabilities to capacity. Anything you want to add here, Lori, about this?
Yeah, we kind of think of it like a building block model where skills, the traditional approach to development and training, is the foundational level. And these skills are more functional and tactical in their nature. They're able to be measured on a binary scale. You have them or you don't have them, and you can add some breadth in there, of course, but it's kind of like a tangible, very tangible set of development goals. Capabilities are the next level up, so they're the combination of skills that are utilized for particular outcomes. As companies look at leader development over the past few years, I've seen many companies starting to develop capabilities, and having leadership models around capabilities are sometimes called competencies. And these are also measurable, not as easily measurable as skills, but still measurable on kind of a standard measurement style that people are familiar with. The capabilities are much more difficult to develop than skills. Sounding Board focuses on this because for leader development, you're working from sort of tangible to the intangible, and the capabilities is the middle set there. And then capacity is at the top of the building in our point of view. It's the most intangible, but it's also the components that take good leaders and turns them into exceptional leaders. So if you have skills and you have capabilities, you can be a good leader out there. But what is that little secret sauce that makes good leaders exceptional? We think it's capacity. And we're going to spend some time talking about that and taking it apart.
Absolutely. We have one question here. People like the kind of the building block model. People are asking about behaviors. So think about, this is like our model in terms of kind of the explicit model, how we think about leadership from a different perspective in response to our uncertainty and change. Now, if you think about social psychology in general, there are what they call the ABCD model of social psychology: affect, behavior, cognition, and drive. In a straightforward language, without this fancy words of social psychology, think about the emotions, think about actions, think about thoughts, right? And think about your drive. So those kind of four are what we overlap with our model here, to think about each one of these as what are the emotions, what are the ideas, what are the behaviors, what are the motivation behind each one of these. So think about them as overlapping of two models, one as a conceptual leadership model and one as a social psychology model that would see the application of these.
So in other words, behavior is only a part of it. So again, if we're reliant on behavior, those behaviors are easily visible and therefore easily measured. But how do you measure things like affect or emotion or thoughts or motivation? So for the complexity of the current work environment, we need a model that's more complex as well. And that means, yes, a foundation in skills and behaviors, but adding a lot more complexity on top of that to match what's needed in the environment.
Exactly. For dynamic leadership, for a world that needs dynamic leadership, you need a dynamic model that takes into consideration all aspects of the human. All right, this is our model. So these are the four big capacities: velocity, flexibility, self-regulation, and pattern recognition. And for each one of these four capacities, there are four subcapacities that would build the major capacity or the macro capacity. And the one in the middle, which is going to be the center of our conversation after we go through today, after we go through the big four capacities, we're going to talk about the internal compass and the central equilibrium. This is a model that Lori, myself, and our third partner in crime, Dr. Pailin Shupachratsu-Pun, she worked with us on this for quite some time right now, about a year, to kind of come up with a simplistic, but not too simplistic, but also not too complex for people. So it's very hard for them to understand or apply. All right, so let's dive into it. All right, so what is flexibility? The first pillar. In a simple language, it's again, we're talking about capacity. We're not talking about the Wikipedia definition. We're thinking about it from a capacity lens. So keep that in mind, is what is the capacity of flexibility? And to kind of, again, the word capacity means how much you have of something and have less of something, and how to increase that something, go beyond the limitation that you have today, beyond the potential. So the capacity is to adapt and thrive in changing conditions personally and within a team. And we think about flexibility from a four-pillar perspective: interpersonal flexibility, your relationship with other people; intellectual flexibility, some people call it intellectual humility, the thinking like a beginner. When you think about new subjects, are you willing to change your perspective about a specific subject that you've been thinking about it in a certain way, and now you have more data suggesting that you probably were wrong and now you're right? So that kind of basically think about it, that flexibility in ideas. And emotional and spiritual flexibility, when you go dive into your emotions, how you're able to have this resilience going back and forth between emotions, that range of emotions, and think about bigger picture. And last is your drive for flexibility, your motivation to think about your ideas and emotions and intellectual, interpersonal relationship. When you know something, when you are aware of it, do you have the motivation to act on it? Any feedback here, Lori, about this? Anything you'd like to
add? The concept of flexibility is actually not new. I think what's a bit new around this is trying to define a little more what that flexibility means. So if you look out at your colleagues or your workforce or yourself, you might be able to say like, oh, this person's flexible and this person's not flexible. But to identify like what makes you think they're flexible or not is what we're trying to identify here. Like what's causing that perception of flexibility or inflexibility. And there's a lot of research going way back that suggests that flexibility is a key component of success. There's been some models that were designed to select executive leaders in an organization. And as they research what was required for success there, they found out that flexibility or versatility actually was the number one component or capacity needed. It wasn't actually like industry experience or previous experience as a CEO or any of that. It really was this ability to adapt to the current environment and even to the future environment.
Excellent, excellent. Some people are mentioning Think Again by Adam Grant. Adam Grant took the intellectual flexibility and expanded on it. So it's a great resource to think about intellectual flexibility and how to move from a cult, cult to culture, with how to move from groupthink all the way to challenging status quo and contributing to the culture. So what we're doing here, we're taking flexibility beyond just the intellectual, because you have the range of emotions that we just talked about, the drive and the interpersonal relationship. Well, we also call it ego transcendence as well. Now, moving to velocity. So velocity means the capacity to make quick but impactful decisions and adapt to fast-paced environment. So the simplest form of velocity is more about move with kind of the speed of change or even faster. Some people call it agility. We think that agility is contained within velocity, and velocity is much larger than agility, because agility doesn't take into account, again, it's more about the behavior. Could be about emotional agility. You can argue that some people use agility with emotions or with mindsets, but we think agility is more used these days when it comes to systems and processes and behaviors. And if you want to take the big picture, we decided that we go velocity is beyond agility, where it takes courage to actually act fast. It takes focus to know exactly what you need to work on and what you're going to deprecate or not work on, and what to triage and how to do it. And then it takes tenaciousness, which is resilience with change. This is where some people call it persistence and resilience together, what we call tenaciousness. So velocity is about making decisions fast, and they're impactful. It's not about just making decisions in speed. They're also impactful decisions. What do you think, Lori?
Yeah, I totally agree. Obviously, Iyad, like agility is important, and it's a current kind of buzzword of the moment, but we think that's only a piece of the pie. We found courage through our coaching experience with folks, that courage is a key component that we don't pay a lot of attention to. We just kind of think leaders should be courageous, but we haven't spent time actually understanding how to develop courage. And then the other one, obviously everyone knows focus is critical when you have a lot of things going on. To be able to stay focused on the most important item is really a talent. I really like this tenaciousness one, though, because I've seen both across my career, through all my coaching, through sounding board, and I have a long martial arts practice, that the persistence over time is a key component of success. It's in a way so simple, like the most shocking way to not succeed is just stop doing whatever it is. Like, you think of weight loss, you think of weight training, you think of just about anything in you're doing in your life. Like, how do you fail? You just stop doing it. So this is also like a capacity that needs to get developed so that you can be more and more persistent and tenacious over time. And it's also an interesting one because in conjunction with flexibility. So that doesn't mean only being tenacious on one thing forever when the external circumstances or even internal circumstances have changed. So it's like finding the sweet spot of these things is really a challenge.
Oh, lovely. Moving to the next one, pattern recognition. So this one probably it's going to take it a little bit further toward cognition, but not necessarily just cognition. It's more about identifying trends and to make those informed decisions. So we talked about flexibility, we talked about velocity, but what are the underlying neural pathways and how they are connecting and reconnecting, and how what's happening in your brain? Tons of research happening right now about complexity and cognitive complexity and pattern recognition, very correlated, highly correlated with IQ, highly correlated with your kind of how your neuroplasticity. Tons of research happening right now on the connection between this neuro leadership, some people call it. So think about it as my capacity to identify trends and identify the right trends from the wrong trends really fast, to make those decisions, taking into consideration as many data points as possible. It's a capacity that we can grow as humans, and definitely as leaders.
Mm-hmm. And this one, I actually think this one's very key. I love pattern recognition as a coach. It's a key component because you're trying to look for the patterns somebody is caught in that's holding them back or stopping them from getting what they want. I actually think naturally people are good at this, but they talk themselves out of it. Like we have some very natural abilities often that show up around fear. Like if you're nervous because you see like someone following you down the street, that's a form of pattern recognition, right? How did you pick out that this might be a threatening situation versus a non-threatening situation? Your brain naturally is doing pattern recognition. So I think part of this capacity is actually bringing that ability up to the surface and actually utilizing it consciously. And the other, someone mentioned on here about non-binary thinking. That's a key part of not only leadership success, but also this model. Because when you have a complex environment, it's the space of gray becomes much, much more large. And there's no like yes or no, right or wrong. It's always looking for the third or the fourth possible right answer. So that non-binary thinking, and that one we are so trained into. Literally, when someone asks you how's your day, you say good or bad. It's like a binary thinking model, right? So to move ourselves, train ourselves out of this binary thinking is quite a challenge.
Amazing. Would like to share a 30-second personal story. This is probably the biggest takeaway from my relationship with Lori, is basically when I think about something, say, what would be another interpretation of that? What would be the third possible answer to that? I used to think, oh no, capabilities versus skills. I think, yeah, one or the other, right? But now I think that we need both. And now we can expand, because when you think about the shades and the spectrum, you think on a spectrum, you stop thinking about either or, you see the and the beauty of the and, you start thinking about new solutions. Some people call it the lateral thinking, some people call systematic thinking, some people call it false dichotomy counter thinking. There are a lot of things, use whatever word to describe, but if you got the point, beyond the 0-1, even computers right now, all AI and logic is based on the fuzzy logic between the 0 and 1s, and not just thinking in 0 and 1s. Awesome. All right. And self-regulation, my favorite one. So it's the capacity to manage one's emotions and actions for personal and team stability. My personal definition of self-regulation is the umbrella capacity of all other capacities when you think about the internal capacity of the human beings. Self-regulation has been studied since Plato and Socrates. We use different terms for it. It's very connected to willpower. It's very connected to self-control. It's connected to emotional regulation. And if you think about self-regulation, high self-regulation is gonna be highly correlated with a lot of other virtues in life and outcomes, namely health, wealth, and educational attainment. But in the context of capacity and leadership development, we think about self-regulation in 4 different ways. We think about them self-reflection and introspection. So asking yourself, what can I do better? What did I do well? How can I do it faster? How can I do it in a different way? This helps you actually self-regulate. Emotional regulation is not synonymous to self-regulation. As you can see, yes, some people say emotional regulation or self-regulation. Self is more than emotions, and a lot of research highly recommend Lisa Barrett's research on emotions and how emotions sometimes are made up, not just made. So you think, well, okay, where the emotions are coming from, you see, now you can see that emotional regulation is one part of self-regulation. Mindful awareness also is thinking beyond the situation and taking a step back and zoom out before, during, or after a situation or in a scenario. And last, this ongoing process of seeking new information without exhausting the brain within the capacity, but while expanding the capacity as well, what we call scan, seek, reflect, and update. Lori, what do you think?
This capacity of self-regulation, I actually think might be the most visible from a leadership perspective. Like if you look out there, you can see the leaders in your organization who have self-regulation and those who don't. One of the things that I noticed in my coaching career is that when people are highly invested, emotional regulation or self-regulation is more difficult. So having a bit of distance between yourself and your work, yourself and your organization, yourself and others, that little bit of like almost like personal space is the place where this self-reflection, self-regulation, awareness happens. So someone's saying boundaries. Yes, boundaries, and also like I call it professional distance, right? That the business, the work, the project is not like on top of you. It's not so close to you that you actually can't see around it or even see it. There's a little bit of space between you and everything you're doing, so you have that space for awareness. And someone's asking for an example of scan, seek, reflect, and update. Maybe you could give an example there.
Absolutely. So my strategy when it comes to scan, seek, reflect, and update is think about it as before I go to bed every night, I ask myself 2 questions, is basically, what did I do well today? And what can I do better tomorrow? This is basically my strategy to scan, seek, reflect, and update. My common sense system is being updated every night at 9-10 p.m. or after. I have a new update every night. In the morning, I kind of look at myself and say, yeah, I have a new way to think about a certain situation from a different angle, from a wider angle. I can zoom in, I can zoom out. So this is my strategy. This is one way to do it. You can do it real time by a lot of people talking about the kind of how to do things, self-regulate real time, which is the hardest one, especially when you're emotionally involved in a relationship or you're too close, is to actually how to pause. Pausing is a really the essence of starting and activating your scanning, seek, and reflect. Because when you're not in a fight or flight mode, you are naturally able to pause, proceed, or perceive the situation differently. So kind of think about, how can I pause to activate this executive function here?
Great. Thanks, Iyad.
Absolutely. All right. So we talked about all those kind of the amazing 4 capacities: flexibility, velocity, emotional self-regulation, and pattern recognition. All right. And then
yes,
now
pattern recognition.
And now, awesome. Now we're going to talk about the one that we've never talked about before. And Lori is going to take us into a journey of what it actually internal compass means from a perspective of capacity for leadership.
And we think of this sort of like the core of the model, this internal compass. Sometimes we call it in the martial arts world central equilibrium, which I thought was a great phrase. It really means like being internally balanced. And I think what's interesting from a leadership perspective is we spend a lot of time on what's showing to the outside. We don't spend as much development time on what's happening on the inside. And yet a concept of an internal compass is critical to exceptional leadership. I often describe this as the eye of the storm. You know, we've been having all of these hurricanes coming recently, and you can just see in the radar, there's always that eye of the storm. Everything's swirling around, the wind's blowing and it's raining and all of that. But in the center of the storm is calm. And the thing about the eye of the storm positioning is it gives you a very strategic viewpoint, because where you are in the middle is calm. You can actually see 360 degrees around you. And when you have that internal stability, you're also not getting blown over by things that are happening. Like when you go back to the idea of focus, there's so many demands every day on leaders that they can be just pulled from one thing to the next thing back and forth and lose that internal stability. So that helps them stay in that center of the storm. And it's a little like like the beam, the roof beam or something on your house. There's probably a name for that. That beam that goes across that really holds your house up. Like you need the foundation, but you also need that like header and beam at the top of the house to keep everything stable as well. When you're talking about core leadership, we're really talking about a set of values and being able to lead out of the values, your own personal values, as well as organizational values. And then the ethical alignment really has to do with your own integrity. Are you operating in integrity with yourself, in integrity with others around you, in integrity with the organization? And I think when people see this, they're like, oh, yes, I totally get how this is a key part of leadership success. But then the next question is like, how do you develop this? This is all like inside the person. So how do you start developing these kinds of abilities and capacities for the leader?
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing this. Okay.
Yeah. Did you want to say anything else about the internal compass? It's actually like one of my favorite concepts that I've been using as a coach for, 25 years.
I learned this from you. So honestly, I love how you are distinguishing between being stable and in the eye of the storm. It's like just visualizing this makes me kind of think about it in an applicable way. So I love that.
Okay, great. Great. I like this concept so much. My previous private coaching practice business name was Leading from Center. Because to me, this is the key to everything as an exceptional leader. All right, now you go ahead on to the next thing you go. I hear a lot of people asking, how do we develop these capacities? And we're going to give you a little list right here on the next slide. One reason, so Sounding Board, we offer a variety of human to human development opportunities because we feel like these kind of capacities are really developed in a one-on-one or a one and small group environment where people can surface some of their internal thinking and feeling and motivation, as well as their behaviors, to really delve into some of these topics. It can work in a training or group workshop environment if you use a lot of self-reflection, but we find the dialogue deepens the thinking and the conversation and the capacity building. So the things that we utilize to develop these capacities are mentorships, sponsorships, one-on-one coaching, group coaching, on-demand coaching, and obviously to deliver all this kind of stuff, you have to have some software to manage all of that. And it's a comprehensive package because look, you have people having group coaching around capacity building. They start to have peer learning around some of these things. Obviously, you can do it in one-on-one. If you offer on-demand coaching, then people can come with a specific situation that they're trying to work through, and use that specific situation for the capacity building. So there's obviously lots of ways to do this, but we think the human interactive way is really one of the best ways to do this. And then the next phase for our development is going to be, how do you measure this on a non-binary scale?
Amazing. We have a question here where, as a leader, how can you help foster these capacities in your team? Well, this is how we do it, and this is how we are impacting the world and building dynamic leaders. That think about everything we talked about as the content, and these are the channels. And then if coaching doesn't create tension, if mentorship doesn't create that internal cognitive dissonance by design, while still maintaining psychological safety, but you need to create the feel of discomfort and tension, people would never grow. And if people don't grow, they will never be able to increase their capacities. And if we don't increase your capacity, you're going to be doomed by your capabilities and skill that you have today. And when you have a new situation, new variables, new scenario, you're not going to be able to be as dynamic as you want to be, and you're not going to be able to transfer that to your leaders as well. So think about coaching. If coaching doesn't create that sense of this is not good enough, and I need to think about the new situation, then, as I think the saying is, the mind, once stretched by a new idea, and never goes back to its original dimension, by Ralph Waldo Wilson. I think that's the whole concept, is what we call it static resilience and dynamic resilience. Static resilience, like a rubber band, you stretch the rubber band, it goes back to the neutral state. With the mind, once it's stretched out, it would never go back to the neutral state.
Yeah. That's a great way to explain it. And just before we go to the Q&A, just want to let you know, I actually have a book about this. So you can go to the next slide. It's available right now on Amazon and all the dealerships, but it will come out on October 3rd. And it kind of gives you the overarching view of this whole process. And what's really interesting in my mind is designed as a coaching engagement. So each chapter is like one coaching session. So you get a kind of a concept of how coaching works as well. Oh, yay. Thanks for pre-ordering it. Yaha. All right. I think we're ready for any additional questions and answers. Jess, what do we got?
All right, let's take a look at the chat. First of all, thank you, Iyad and Lori, for this fantastic discussion. It's super interesting. Let's take a look over here at the chat. Now is the time for your burning thoughts and questions. Going once, going twice. Lots of really great comments from everyone on engagement today. I'll wait about one more minute. Wow, everyone's kind of collecting their thoughts before we close it out.
Well, here, let me just add one piece of information that I wanted to talk about, which is how this whole model was developed. And so there's been an interesting blend of items. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we have the data from 50,000 leadership coaching engagement, not just coaching engagements, but leadership coaching engagements. We have the experience I had over 20 years coaching both public and private companies, C-suites and CEOs. And then we have this blended all of that with behavioral science to create this very robust model. And so we think it will be very validated because it's based in this long history of experience paired with current theory. And then the measurement part of it, I think, is going to be really exciting because it'll be such a unique, non-linear measurement. Because how do you measure capacity, really? It's like you could measure the cup being filled with water, but capacity is really not just filling a cup with water, it's actually getting a bigger cup. So how do you keep measuring, a bigger and bigger cup till you're, up to the big gulp or something? Yeah.
Thank you, Lori. We have a
And
question.
I saw one other in there. Yeah.
Yeah. To what extent are you working with vertical stage development?
Yeah, I'm going to let you jump in this one, but to us, this is all the vertical development. We consider skill development to be the horizontal development. It is moving you forward in your current pathway, and that capability and capacity development is vertical development. So Sounding Board is basically all about vertical development. Organizations have been doing horizontal development and getting better and better at upskilling folks over the many years, but vertical development hasn't received as much attention. And that vertical development really is what we're talking about here with capability and capacity building.
I attended a vertical leadership development training with an training that's different. The model is different. So I think it's called VLD. And it was talking about like layers of a strategist, alchemist, So this is a different model. We think about vertical leadership development not as a hierarchical per se this way. We think about it more fluid and dynamic. And we think about even the measurement is more fluid and dynamic. That doesn't take anything from the other models out there. Again, back to the either or, it's just a different model. Even we're using the same word, which is vertical. So think about vertical, that doesn't mean actually physically vertical or like actual vertical, is more vertical in terms of expanding capacity as well.
Yeah. We don't use one of those definitions of vertical development because it's still a linear binary model, and we think the binary and linear approaches is for horizontal development, and that vertical development can't be measured or developed in that same way. It's almost like solving a vertical problem with a horizontal approach. So we're trying something very new where we're trying to solve the vertical problem with a vertical approach, which is not going to be the same kind of staging and measurement as a linear model would have.
Right. Thank you both. Can you comment on how developing one capacity feeds into others, and is there a best place to start?
I actually have found that the capacities are interrelated. So yes, when you develop in one place, it's probably going to impact other places. What's really nice about that is it can create like an exponential development. So it's not a one-to-one development like a horizontal model would be. This is an exponential development. So for organizations to put funds into this kind of development, they're going to get a big return on their investment, because it's going to be an exponential return on investment. Yeah, maybe you want to say something else about that as well.
Absolutely. So I used to work when I used to kind of recruit and lead recruiting teams. If people work in HR, and probably you can relate, people who have military backgrounds and sports, coming from sports backgrounds, or medical, where they're kind of emergency, rooms and all that. Well, people who have work in these domains have high capacity in general for kind of adapting to change and fast change and making decisions and pattern recognition and all that. So if you notice that a lot of people who have kind of this background, they are top performers in their organizations, especially if they flex and become more fluid in their leadership styles, and they know when to use a skill, when not to use a skill. So this is how I think about capacity, is transferable by nature. It's internal. You cannot not to transfer capacity because it's internal. So capacity is a human investment, I would say, beyond just a specific situation for a specific goal.
Thank you, Iyad. And this next question is interesting. So would you recommend investing coaching in high potential people over people who need more development? Is there a theory on this?
So we have customers who start with a high potential, say core cohort of folks who are going to engage in coaching, but that high potential concept is based in the 9-box model, which is a model from the last century. And it's a subjective model because it's trying to identify potential. And we know that the identification of potential is heavily biased by individual experience. So although many companies are still doing that, we recommend going well beyond a high potential group that was identified through a 9-box or some other subjective model. And we can help you identify how to form those cohorts really from a capability or capacity building approach, as well as from a business outcome approach, instead of a subjective potential approach.
Absolutely. One 30-second comment on this. There are tons of research happening right now. When I say tons, like probably 3 papers, but it's like from, but it's at least 300% more than we used to be, but about women and women of color specifically, and how this report is published every year by McKinsey and Lean In organization, that they talked about the broken rung problem, and mainly it's about potential. Yeah. Even if women outperform their peer men, they're still perceived that have less potential, even if they prove that. And this is the real problem happening right now, not the glass ceiling problem we think about. It just starts from the beginning. Even 1% shift in perspective would lead to a huge impact. There's a paper about what they call the equity gap, and how to solve for equity gap by just moving from the potential assessment to go beyond that, the 9-box model that Lori just talked about.
Yeah. And I see one other in here. What's the number one advice for someone just starting a leader development program? You're probably going to hate this, but my advice is don't take the easy way out and just do a skills-based program. Be more sophisticated, more impactful, more complex by using a capability or capacity development model, not just a skill development model.
Thank you so much, Laura. That's great advice. So we have time for just one more question, and this one is around AI. I'm curious to know if you think AI may ever play a role in this model. What future opportunities you think AI might open up in this?
Mm-hmm. I actually think yes, in a couple of ways. So AI is one of the big keys of AI is actually pattern recognition. So using AI to review conversations, written communications, sessions, training sessions, coaching sessions, and look for the patterns that the human beings maybe didn't pick up, can be really useful, and then use those as recommendations. I also think there may ultimately be sort of a self-development tool on the pattern recognition side specifically that helps people increase their ability to recognize patterns. Some of the other ones will be harder down the road, but things around self-regulation are already happening. So if you have, a Ring or a Fitbit or Apple Watch or something, some of those already have like temperature and tactile measurements that can let you know if you're starting, to get emotionally overwrought, and give you a feedback about that. So you can take that little pause and be like, ooh, let me take a breath. So those are just two ways. I think there actually is going to be a lot of ways that don't in any way negate the need for human development. They'll be more like supports and aids.
100%.
Yeah. Okay.
Quickly, 1 second here, 10 seconds is, I think artificial intelligence will boost human intelligence and increase their capacities.
Awesome. Thank you, Iyad. All right. And just a really quick comment, augmented leadership. Bob Johansson was just talking about this on Institute for the Future 10-year forecast. So great comments, everyone. All right. So that is our time for today. Thank you, everyone, for your great comments and your questions. Thank you again to Lori and Iyad for this very interesting presentation. And thank you again to our sponsor, Sounding Board. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And this concludes today's webinar. We thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at webcast.td.org. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with that link. Please be sure to visit our event calendar to sign up for future webinars at webcast.td.org/events. Have a great day and make it count.